right, the second question. So what share of childcare costs should be paid for by the federal government? So I'll throw this to Sarath just to get his views on it from Canada.
So as far as I know, it is here. A great share of welfare in terms of, I think, childcare and health services, they actually, that share actually comes from the provincial budget rather than the federal budget. I mean, at least the setup here is that there is some great deal of federalism. So, provinces they get a lot of leeway to make decisions in this way. In the province in which I live, Ontario, has a different type of budget reallocations and preferences from, say, something like Quebec. So generally, I think as a matter of administration, as a matter of administrative convenience, it's not really convenience. As a matter of administrative philosophy, these kind of decisions are generally delegated to much more local levels, because the decisions have to be made at local level. So you can't have like a one solution that fits all. So I think this is about the share of the childcare costs, and I think for me, as a voter, the question is rather about how efficient the decision would be if it's paid by, if there is like a share of cost that is borne by the federal government, and what kind of checks and balances they would put in place, and how that would improve the costs in the system, or how effectively whether it would improve any efficiency or not. Because at least in Canada here, in some provinces, the care, child care or healthcare, even though the provinces they do spend similar levels of budget, the allocation is not that good. I mean, it's some provinces do it worse than other provinces. So I think this should be, this for me would be an empirical call based on what the literature says and based on what the projections would say in terms of efficiency, whether if really federal government pays for it, pays for a share of it, obviously they would want some level of control over how it's spent, right? So whether that would be really useful or not, or whether it would that really hamper decision making, then I think that's the kind of approach that I would take.
Yeah, awesome. From a value perspective, do you think we have something to say here from the responsibility of a government? So Aditya or Babu Gogineni, do you want to speak on the value perspective here?
I have no clue. I'm afraid I have no clue about how much tax is collected by the federal government. If the government has to share the costs, I need to understand how much it is getting from the states. But for me, the fascinating thing is that in Canada, in the UK, or in Australia, New Zealand, childcare costs are paid for by the government. I think that welfare state, that state which looks after the welfare of the children in society, that it takes care of education, that there is universal education. I think these are fantastic things. Who pays for them is a matter of, exactly as Sarath said, it's about facts and figures and so on. But I'm fascinated by the idea that in some societies, the care of children is considered to be the duty of society, of the government, not the upbringing of children, but the care, the costs involved. I mean, universal medical care, universal education, at least up to high school level, pre-university level, is great for me. And I've been fascinated by some discussion in Australia that even university education, like President Biden has been at least talking of, and some of the contestants in the American election were saying that all student debt should be abolished. So when somebody wants to study, be educated, and people who get educated in France or Germany or UK or the US or Australia are most likely to remain in the countries where they are educated, most of them. And therefore, it would be a fantastic investment in the future of that society. Can't say the same for India, though. Most of the well-educated people are leaving the country for various reasons. So while I don't know the answer to this, because I don't know what the data is all about, it's fantastic. It is to be applauded that children are, in a sense, not legally, the ward of the state, of society. It's something that communism did not achieve in the communist countries. So yeah. I think it's great, but I don't know the answer.
Yes.
So Arjun, I mean, I don't have the context here. So can you what's like the argument between choosing much smaller and much greater here? I mean, I just want to see why what is the argument that's popular argument that's going around in the election campaign to choose much greater instead of much smaller?
Yeah, so like all of the questions that we'll see today, it's based on any variations in policy between the two main parties that are competing for government. So there's the Labor Party and the Liberal Party in Australia, and because they've got a variation in their policy for childcare, this question has come up. And the purpose of this, I suppose, from a vote compass perspective, is to see how many people are actually valuing this versus how many are not. So for myself, as a young parent, this is quite critical. And one of the factors that a lot of people don't think about is the cost of living, which is a big factor, but also the amount of paternal or parental leave that's given in Australia as a matter of policy. So if you look at those two on the balance, I feel like more should be provided, not particularly to high-earning Australians, but definitely to the less than median household income. They definitely do need the help with childcare.
So would you rather have federal government pay for the healthcare cost, or instead, have the tax money diverted to province so that province can make decisions? I mean, what's the difference between these two?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now, it's the federal government through Centrelink that provides this service to people. And the way it's done is it's subsidised. So I go to a childcare centre, and if I have a Centrelink number, then they will charge me less, and they'll charge whatever the subsidy is directly from the federal government. So it keeps things a lot simpler. I think just from a portfolio perspective, childcare does fall under the federal government. There's a lot of mistrust in the state governments at the moment in Australia for various reasons. So I think if you ask the question now, most people would say would rather get it directly from the federal government. But this is a demographic question, isn't it? I mean, as a young parent, I would lean towards this side of the equation much greater. But as someone who's a small business owner who knows that there's a trade-off, if you spend too much here, you're going to spend less on business subsidies or the economy, etc. They might choose the other side of the scale. So it just depends on who you talk to.
That's interesting, because the trade-off here seems to be between business subsidies and welfare costs, and the farmer will typically win. I mean, in such situations. I mean, unfortunately,
that's right.
For whatever it's.
That's right. Sorry, you had your hand up, Babu Gogineni.
Yes, I'm slightly different point, but linked to children. Yes. I quickly ran through the questions, and I did not find a question related to what I am going to raise, which is Australia's rather poor performance in terms of child rights that the UN has repeatedly asked Australia to revise and improve. Australia is one of the few countries of the world where criminal liability responsibility for a person starts at the age of 12, I think, or 10, but it's something pathetically low. Yes. A child of 10 or 12 is hardly able to decide anything for himself or herself in a mature way. And I think modern understanding of how the decision-making in the brain works is it's well past your 20s that you begin to take mature decisions, whether right or wrong, understanding the consequences somewhat. So to have a child, somebody who is not even able to decide well what to have for dinner or what music they like, were not allowed sexual activity legally at that age with another person, who cannot vote at that age, who cannot decide things at that age, can be made legally responsible for an act they perform or commit. That I think is a dangerous situation. And
Absolutely.
I have seen that that's not a question being raised in this vote compass, which means for the people who formulated this has not been important, whereas for the world it has been. Whereas the UN has urged Australia to upgrade this. Just wanted to put that on.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there might be two reasons why it's not in the list. Three. I mean, one is the people who put this together, like you say, might not see it as an important issue, which is a huge concern. But the other two reasons, one might be there might not be a variation in policy between the two major parties. There might be going for the same thing, or there might not be any difference in how they're looking at it. But also there might be a state-related issue as well in terms of convictions and courts. It might be a state issue more so than a federal issue. So it just depends on what they're trying to get out of it, I suppose. But yeah, it's a great point. I know Amnesty International has been working closely with different political groups, including the Reason Party, which is a state-based party in your hometown, Victoria. So there's a lot of conversation that's been happening, just not at a federal level, which would be good to see. So I think with this one, where do people lean? Are we leaning towards greater or smaller, just on the balance?
Arjun,
given there's no information.
Yeah, I'm not a parent by myself, but what I can say as an employer of over 50 people under me, that means that I'm having 50 families under me. And one of the biggest challenge for me as an employer is that my staff are unable to come to work many times because of this cost of the childcare. Many of the time they say that it's a bit too much for them to leave the kid for the childcare because they have to put too much of money, and then they just skip the work or they take a carer's leave, and that directly affects my productivity across the company. So I'm not onto the extreme corners of either of the extreme corners of this question, but I would say that somewhat greater. What we are getting now as a consumer of this benefit, I don't think it's bad. Of course, it is good, but something better than this will definitely also improve the productivities in the industries.
I tend to agree with that. Yeah. So
that's interesting, Auditya. So do you know, like, a lot of small business also share the same sentiment as you?
Exactly. If I can give you my average, it is 1.5 employee per day takes a carer's leave just because of this, and their availabilities are very difficult to achieve for us to run the business, especially like a hotel business that runs for 24/7, and then people having to take care of their child, because in this country there are a lot of independent families. Back in India, you might have someone, a relative, or your mom, dad, or your aunt, or someone to look after the kids, but here you have to definitely live with the childcare support. And then that directly hits all the industries, from small business to the big industries. That's a major chunk of our business, sick calls and carer's leave. So I think giving somewhat greater than what you currently get would definitely encourage people to be more available for work. So I think that will be a great thing if you can go for somewhat greater.
And one interesting observation would be that this kind of decision, whether whether childcare costs are borne by the government, or whether they increase or decrease, or whether they stay the same, that would be actually the cost of that would be actually disparate. The disparity, there will be gender disparity in the way how the cost would be borne, because I think women would be affected more because of if the cost of childcare goes down. I mean, if the share of the cost of childcare borne by the federal government goes down, because at least in societies like India, it's primarily thought that the job of bringing up a child or taking care of a child is of the woman. So a lot of women actually, they take breaks. I mean, even women who are like paid high, who work like who are like business executives, even those level of employment, women who are employed in that level, also they would also take break, the quote unquote break, and to raise a child. It's not just about the costs. I think for them, it's also about the time and the time involved, and the attention needed to bring up the child, and the lack of support systems in doing that. So I think that's an interesting point to make. I don't know how it works, but it works in similar way in Australian society as well. It may not be as severe as what we see in societies like India, but there'd still be sort of gender disparity in the way how these burden would be, who carries this burden.
Yeah, absolutely. As a society and also as a culture in Australia, we're still a very female-centric caregiver place. I mean, we haven't evolved to a point of equality there by far margins. So yeah, absolutely agreed. So on balance, maybe we'll go with somewhat greater, and we'll move on to the next question if that's okay with everyone.
Yes, please.
Awesome. Proposition 3, asylum seekers should be held in offshore detention centres while their claims are being processed. So